And I will let everybody know at this point I'm recording the meeting. Here's Siobhan.
I'm sorry, Leslie, I don't have my list in front of me right now of all the members. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Well, we could also just the members on the call to identify themselves, just so that you've got an accurate record for minutes.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm Leslie Bakken-Oliver. I am co-chair with Wally Goulet. Welcome. Pass to you, Wally.
Okay, well, we've got two of us named anyway, and maybe let's go around for Becky's sake to list everybody who's here that's on the commission. If you want to sign in, Scott.
Hi, Scott Burlingame here from Minot and Independence Incorporated.
And Siobhan.
Larson, Protection and Advocacy.
Great. Thanks, Teresa.
And Siobhan Jeppa, citizen.
I see the Senator Lee on board. Judge Romanick.
Yep, I'm here. Thanks.
Okay. And let's see, is Carlotta on?
I do not see her yet.
Okay.
Representative Elisa Mitstock from Wahpeton.
Great. Glad to have you on board. Julianne, did I see you? I thought I saw you earlier. Is she on?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. And Siobhan she's signed in?
Yes, this is Siobhan. I'm on.
Great. How's the weather out in Colorado?
Been beautiful for leaf peeping. There hasn't been any snow though, which is fine.
A little snow. That's something. Okay. All right. I think that is there anyone on the commission that we haven't accounted for? I think we have our quorum and we have everybody except Carlotta, I think, on board. So that's great. And we've called the meeting to order. And the first item of business would be the minutes for the May 20th meeting as amended. Has everybody received a copy of those and had a chance to look at them?
The amendment was simply to add in Carlotta to the roll of members that were there. She was not able to make the first few minutes of the meeting, and then after we had called the roll, was in attendance.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion to approve those the minutes of the May 20th meeting.
This is Teresa, so moved.
Romanick, second.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. Opposed, same sign. Minutes of the May 20th meeting are approved, and we'll look at the July 15, 2020 meeting minutes now as well. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes as they were circulated? Okay, if not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Romanick, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Burlingame will second.
Thank you, Scott. All those in favor signify by saying
Aye.
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 opposed, same sign. Those minutes are approved as well. The second item on the agenda is the discussion of quarterly meeting, commission meeting dates. And I guess we just open it up for discussion. There are some issues, because we will have a legislative session coming up in 2021. So we want to accommodate that as best we can and be in tune with that, but also I think last time we talked about having quarterly starting in January, and then the questions come up, maybe February would be more convenient this year. So did anyone want to weigh in on your preference? Basically, we've got two sets, the January, April, July, and September, or we move to a February, May, August, and November calendar.
The reason that I suggested that we put this on the agenda was that it looks like about half the commission would have during the legislative session an increased other responsibilities and, well, just things to divert their attention. And it would seem that putting this after the legislative session would eliminate that potential conflict for at least one of the 8 dates that we have.
This is Judy Lee, and I'm not finding a raise my hand thing. And I don't disagree with that. The only thing is this, if you were going to do it during what I would call regular Zoomy hours, it would be more of a challenge. But if we did something like 4 o'clock to 5:30 or something, it wouldn't even have to be a 3-hour meeting, for heaven's sake. But if you wanted to have something during the session, if you thought that was important, if it could be done in the latter half of the afternoon, that would still be possible to do. And because it's, you know, some of us will be in the Capitol and others will still be virtual anyway, that doesn't really matter. But anything between 7:30 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon would be hard to do. For me, the rest of you will be there, that's fine. It's okay, I'm just saying for me.
Well, and certainly there may be something that we want to check in on and that's happening at the legislature. So I would hope that we'd have at least one meeting during that time.
That would be my thought as well.
When does the legislative session normally end? Are we talking sometime in April?
Yes, then hang on, I'll look at my other calendar here because I've got it in that, but it starts January 5th and don't do anything. In fact, I would suggest you not think about doing it until after crossover, which is around what used to be Washington's birthday, you know, the end of January. But rather look at something early in the second part. And Teresa, you're there often enough as well over the years to be tuned in, and others on the call as well. But that way it would have been, if there was something relating to Olmstead, it would have come through the first house and would be early on in the process of being heard in the other house. So that if there was a need for conversation, and obviously as the co-chairs can change the date, this isn't going to be one of the 10 commandments here. So, but that would be a suggestion just as far as process. And you will have somebody or more than one person who would come and testify in a committee hearing anyway. But in order to catch it after it's been acted on in one house, but before it's been moved on in the second one, which also means, of course, you're beating out a conference committee, that might be kind of more ideal timing. I'm happy to listen to input from anybody else on that one.
This is Teresa, and I have a question. Do we have any more commission meetings scheduled through 2020? Because there's still October, November, December, and I'm fine with waiting till after crossover, but I think it's going to be quite a long time between meetings.
Oh, we shouldn't go from now until like March. No, I agree with that.
If we, excuse me.
Can you speak to that? What our schedule is for the rest of the year?
Currently, there is not a scheduled meeting before January the 13th of next year.
Well, we could do it January 13th, or you could do it during the you could do it during the first day of the session in December, or not the first day, but you know, in the early December meeting too. If it, unless it looks like it's going to be a super long meeting, there would be ways to plug that in as well. But again, I'm only one person in this thing, so it has to work for everybody. I'm not saying you ought to do it the way I'm saying. I'm just saying this is what the situation is for the legislature. I'm just getting into the calendar.
My thought was more identifying Teresa, Julie, Leslie, yourself, and Representative Mitskog as all having additional duties and additional things occupying their attention during the session beyond the Olmstead Commission. I mean, shoehorning two meetings in, one early in the session and the other at the end of the session might not work as well as what you were articulating with having one in the middle, once there's been some identification of bills that may have pertinence to the Olmstead Commission and crossover. Good afternoon, Carlotta.
Good afternoon. Sorry about that. I had some staff issues to take care of.
Yeah, welcome. We're just in the second discussion item. We're talking about scheduling for next year. Well, what about if we look at the second offering, then and then setting up a time in February for our first meeting of the year? That would give the legislative a few chapters that they've already covered by that time.
This is Representative Mitskog.
Yes.
I certainly don't have the experience that Senator Lee has, but I think late January, early February, I think it would be helpful, and then meet again after crossover, whether it be sometime in March, if we have to react, or have discussion about pending legislation, or that would be my suggestion. And I think something late in the day, like a 4 o'clock, that certainly is doable with my schedule.
Thank you.
The last day of the session, the 80th day, is April 28th. Crossover is the 26th, 27th, and 28th, that weekend. It's like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We get one more day off.
Crossover, which month are you saying?
February.
February,
okay.
Okay, well, I'm glad to entertain a motion to put this in play, whichever, and we can change what's being suggested there by Dan as well too, however that would best work. Because are we saying a February and April meeting, or is that what we're looking at?
How about if we have, as whatever our policy might be, that we meet quarterly? Because then it would be fine if we met in February and April, because they would be 2 different quarters. And if we do it, but if you're going to do it in April, and you did it in February, which is the end of one house and the beginning of the other, one way or the other, if you do it before the 28th of April, you're not going to have a chance to testify in there, because conference committees don't permit testifying. So it will be a wrap up at that point. I guess you might as well wait until after the session is over. And I would think maybe it wouldn't be a terrible idea to allow that to be a little bit flexible. If we nail in a date, I don't know about your life, but I am highly scheduled, as I'm sure the rest of you are as well. And sometimes stuff comes up that you just have to throw in there, even though it might not have been first. So I would like to allow the co-chairs some discretion in whatever it is that we might decide. That's all. We can pick dates if you want, but if we allowed the co-chairs to have some discretion about what's kind of shaking out in the session, we'll know by the end of the 3rd week that what the bills are, because they can be introduced in the Senate House the first 2 weeks, and the Senate the first 3 weeks. So all the bills will have been introduced after the 3rd week in January. Let me get back there. Deadline for senators is the 25th of January for bills, resolutions and stuff afterwards, but for bills is Monday, the 25th of January. So if we met after that, I'm just throwing this out, and I'm only speaking for me. I'm not saying that this doesn't affect other people on the call. But it seems to me it might not be bad thinking to meet right after that deadline for bills to be introduced, because by that time they will be introduced and assigned to committees, and we'll kind of know where they're going to be, because they're not all going to be in human services either. You know, part of the balancing act is caseload for the workload for the committees, and sometimes things get moved to another committee if there's a dual issue on something.
Well, it seems to me that if we were to pick February, May, August, and November, we could move that up as early in February as we'd like. So in a sense, it'd be the end of January, or we could go mid-February, you know, based on any legislative activity you folks are involved in and that we might want to be involved in.
Yep.
That makes sense. So, and that keeps the quarterly routine, so.
Mhm.
Okay. It seems to me that that's what I'm hearing from you folks. So I don't know that we need a formal motion, but we'll just notify everybody that we are set to have quarterly meetings, and these will be the quarterly meetings that we're looking at. And with the idea that we can change those dates, I think, isn't there something, Dan, if we notify the state? I mean, that gives us, it isn't a special meeting, it's a planned meeting.
If there's a regular schedule, we're supposed to file that annually if practicable. If we would, you know, indicate in our bylaws that I believe we already do, that we meet quarterly, that would just mean that at some point at or near the first meeting, we would set a schedule and we can then submit it to the Secretary of State's office. And I believe then we would be covering our bases.
And I think that has to be out for 2 weeks, doesn't it? Leslie, you would know probably.
I'm not aware of the 2-week rule.
I could be off. Wouldn't be the first time.
The 440420 doesn't have that requirement, at least not explicitly within the body of that. So,
okay. Well, we could be polite and let people have a few days' notice, though.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's.
So Wally, quick question, would that be with the understanding that we still are going to have one more meeting in calendar year 2020?
I guess that's up to us at this point to set that. And this would be appropriate time to talk about that as well.
Okay.
It probably would not be a bad idea to have a plan going in to the legislative session. And it could be a brief meeting. I mean, we could set up an hour meeting in December or something like that, if that made sense to everybody. But I think it's just good to get it on the calendar for everybody to know what's coming.
Sounds fine.
Do you want to search for dates on that one, Dan, or?
Yes, I will. The understanding that I have is that it is, from what you just briefly mentioned, 1 hour sometime the first 2 weeks of December, which would sort of run from the 30th of November through the 11th of December.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Keep away
May
from
I
the
add? May I add?
holidays.
May I add that the legislative session, organizational session begins on the 1st at 9 a.m. and ends on the 3rd at about noon. There will be some training schedules that, and listen, Representative Mitzgog and I, sorry, I'd rather you call me Judy too, may choose to be involved with, but it will be those 3 days, but it's really 2.5. So, you know, it could be done after the regular sessions, which is scheduled for 10:45, but I'd bet on noon just for the heck of it.
This is Teresa. I think that'd be great. And I'm not sure at this point if we should say it's only going to be an hour. Some things may come to the surface between now and then. So I don't want to extend it either, but I don't think we should limit it to an hour.
No, it's good. It's a good suggestion. I'm just saying it could be the kind of thing that if it was a legislative meeting, if that was the import of it, we could have that set. We'll keep that in mind. I think we're all getting in that Zoom world where a couple hours on Zoom is what most of us can handle. So that's the only reason I'd even say something like an hour or 2 hours. Okay, well, I think we've got that in mind for everybody at this point, and Dan will come up with the final dates on each of those.
Could I clarify something from Judy and Representative Mitskog? You indicated that morning or afternoon during that week would more likely be open, the week that includes the 1st or the 3rd.
Well, we'll be busy all morning and afternoon on the 1st and the 2nd, but we will be done noonish on the 3rd. We don't have, I don't know, I don't believe I have gotten a schedule. It's a little early for that. We'll get through the legislative management session first in November.
Okay. Thank you, Judy.
But I can get back to you or talk to you when we get a schedule. Or you could check the calendar, the legislative calendar on the nd.gov website. Everything is on. That's what I was just looking at anyway. And you can see whenever you wish.
So Lisa, I
Good
think
call.
it'd be difficult to try to schedule anything during those days just because things do pop up with various meetings.
Yep.
So I would think something Thursday afternoon would be the safest bet, or that following week.
All right. Well, I'll push out a calendar. I won't include the 1st and the 2nd as possible meeting dates, and we'll see what we get.
All right. Well, we'll move on to item 3. And Dan, if you want to explain the requests with this one.
Yes, Wally. It was brought up to us at the end of the last meeting that citizen inquiry may not be entirely apt because some portion of the people that we may be responding to will not actually be citizens of the United States in, the precise sense of the word. So individual might be an option that does clarify that what we would be dealing with would be an individual rather than a collective or systemic inquiry, and it doesn't have that precise term of art connotation that the lawyers at the table might see from citizen.
Okay, and that's been in our process now. Is that where the word change will come in that you're suggesting?
Yes. What we had debated was a citizen inquiry, and the comment was made at the end of our last meeting that citizen might not be entirely appropriate and exclusive for some people that we would be wished responding to. So individual would give some of the same overtones of specific person related inquiry versus systemic groups or systems related inquiry.
Okay, is there any discussion of the commission as to changing that term? Anybody have any issues with that?
I think we ought to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's the most inclusive way to go and it makes perfect sense.
Agreed.
I agree as well.
Okay, well, maybe just if we had passed a simple motion that'll rectify that. If we'll change our reference in the inquiry process to individual rather than citizen. Is there somebody make that motion?
I'll make that motion. This is Julie Horntevet.
Thank you, Julie. Is there a second to that?
This is Carlotta. I'll second it.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlotta. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Hi.
Okay, motion carries. Item 4, we go to the DOJ settlement update. Do you have anything to report to us on that at this point, Leslie?
No final agreement has been reached, but it is And I really have the U.S. Attorney in North Dakota to thank for the additional information about this. But apparently this agreement has worked its way up the food chain at the Department of Justice and is at the second to last level of approval. We've made a few tweaks along the way, but very few. And we sent back the last draft early last week and hope to get something back in the next 3 weeks. But I've made predictions before and I've been wrong. So I'm just hoping that we get this done before the legislative session starts.
Great. And you're working with Drew Wrigley? Is that who
Well,
is?
Not typically, but because he's, as lieutenant governor, he was very well aware of the situation and I think involved. And he's taken an interest in this, as has a member of his staff, Tara Iverson, who is working with the DOJ lawyers in Washington to help us reach a settlement.
And this would not make any difference as to the federal election that we're going to go into? I mean, if this is something that will stay in play no matter who's elected, is that what you predict?
Well, that would be my hope. And I'll tell you that it started in 2015 and we had a different president at that time. And it's continued through this administration and it looks like it is going to, it will not be done, I don't think, before the next president is elected or re-elected, as the case may be.
Right. Yeah. Just knowing that we're in that cusp of a national election, I just was hoping that wouldn't upset the process.
I hope not.
Does anyone else have any questions for Leslie? Right.
This is Teresa, and maybe this isn't a fair question, Leslie, but do you know if anything ever came to fruition in South Dakota?
I don't know.
Okay. I'm happy to do some follow-up on that to find out. I'm just curious. It seemed like that's been setting there for even longer than North Dakota.
It has. You're right. I would love for you to follow up.
Okay. I'm happy to do that. Okay.
Okay.
And that's all I have, Wally.
Thank you, Leslie. The next item is the information portal for Olmstead. Dan, you want to give us a report on that?
Actually, Wally, that was the email thing on there is just I was going to let everyone know that I was going to ask ITD if the commission finds it appropriate to have a separate Olmstead information portal email. Should there be some time when I am, for some reason, unavailable to check that for some sort of citizen contact, someone else would be able to go in and just check and see if there was anything that needed to be urgently responded to.
Well, I think that's very important, Dan.
Just something. I was thinking of something straightforward like olmstead@nd.gov. So if that's okay with everyone, I'll have that set up through ITD.
This is Judy Lee. I so move.
Second to that motion to make that request.
I'll second. Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Wally, could we maybe ask all the participants and listeners to mute themselves when they don't need to talk, just so we eliminate all background noise.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. I think everyone should have heard that comment. And us Zoomers now kind of understand a lot of things seem to happen during Zoom meetings. We do our best to keep stray cats and other things away from the camera. All right, just a question on when we talk about the information portal. We also, I think you've shared the website as well, Dan, with everyone.
Yes, everybody should have gotten an email with the website URL. If you haven't had the chance to see it, I can put the URL in the meeting chat.
Okay. One of the things when you do a search and put Olmstead Commission in, it'll take you to all kinds of things other than that website.
We are unfortunately not yet high enough in the Google search rankings.
Yeah, so I mean, knowing the website section is fairly important. It takes us to the Department of Human Services. A lot of the old information there too. So, if there's any way you can work with ITD to see what we can do on that. I don't know if anybody else has that same issue.
You could talk to DHS about pulling it off. Nobody thought of it, maybe.
Actually, they've been little by little whittling down the information there. So I think at this point they'd be glad to be shot of it.
Okay. Well, that might be a nice tweak, just because the other day I didn't have the website and I went just on a normal search and I probably got about 6 or 8 things that were really old news and didn't take me to where I wanted to go. So just something to look at. All right, the next item for our discussion is the Olmstead Inquiry Initial Screening Subcommittee. Who will be the membership, and duties, and that. Dan, if you want to.
Yeah. As we discussed last meeting, the idea would be to have a small subcommittee for any individual inquiry that would come in after I had done some brief initial fleshing out of a person's concerns, meet with a couple of members of the committee, and then as members of the subcommittee, commission members, and see if anyone else had any thoughts on it. Just get a general consensus on whether if this was appropriate to be continuing on as an Olmstead complaint. And we had agreed on that, but not, indicated who would be on the subcommittee, whether there would be a rotation that we would go through, and what, if any, parameters on the duties there would be. Like, is this something that we would agree that people would be available during off hours, since this is a matter that we might want to have a 20-minute meeting on within a day or two of initial contact?
Anyone have any thoughts on that? Want to share, Dan?
Well, it seems to me it would depend on the convenience of the person who is raising the issue to see if there's a time during the day. I mean, I wouldn't think you'd want to have for an initial discussion more than 30 minutes just for the introduction of the whole thing, because it's going to get more involved than that. You might want to move it forward in a different way. But find out if something during regular working hours works for them and it works for the people who would be on this small committee, then do it whenever it's convenient. I don't think we need to set a time for that. That's just like making a dental appointment. When can I make it work?
Senator, I agree that it would be whenever we can make it work, but the idea would be not having the individual at whatever meeting we had to talk about the substance of their concerns. It would be myself and 2-3 commission members, however many would be appropriate for this, getting together and discussing what I had learned after the initial contact had been made.
So you're not talking about having the individual who raised the inquiry there to visit with the other couple of members of the commission, is that correct?
I think that generally, I don't think it would be appropriate because there may be concerns or language raised by persons that are not in their situation that might not appeal to the person making the inquiry. For instance, if I am of the opinion that it does not rise to the level of an Olmstead level complaint, and I am articulating that and we're having a discussion on whether or not it hits that threshold, I think that would be a very difficult conversation to have with an individual, especially in a multi-member setting. I am more than willing to take on that responsibility myself, but I think it would dampen the discussion amongst commission members if we have the individual present at these. And it's, again, one more person to schedule a meeting around.
I'm just thinking that if I were on that small committee, and believe me, I'm not volunteering, that I would want to hear from the complainant, let's use that word, as well as a report. This is not the least bit disparaging the details you would have put together, Dan, but it's different.
Yeah.
Hearing from the person, after 25 years of hearings, I can tell you that everybody doesn't say things in the same way. So I would think that there would need to be a few minutes allotted during which, and maybe with Zoom, the individual could meet with these two people or whatever, and get some feedback from them, just at a little higher level, not into the details, just for the evaluation part. And then they would be excused, and then the committee members themselves could decide what the next step would be. I'm just not comfortable with not having the access to the complainant by the people who are on that. It's sort of a screening committee. I hate to say it that way, but that's kind of it. But I could be off. I'm listening to the rest of you.
No, I mean, we had used the term screening or initial screening for that. So I believe that's a valid point. Scott, you had your hand raised?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say one of the things that I have really worked on when I worked with people that are filing complaints, especially because we are calling it a complaint. So is every single time they have to tell their story, the less likely they're going to continue with the process. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't ever allow somebody to speak to the group, but I would just very highly recommend that it be a choice, because believe it or not, a group of us can sometimes be quite intimidating for somebody that's struggling with life and struggling with the situation. So, and yeah, so that's just my input, is that it's fine to have it as an option, and it actually should be an option, but I don't think it should be mandated or anything along that lines.
Good point.
You know, I know we're getting used to the Zoom world, and you can record it as we're recording this. Would that be helpful? I mean, to me, this sounds a bit between screening and an appeal, so to speak. I mean, you'd be the initial person, Dan, looking at this, right? And then you'd take it to this committee?
Yeah, Wally. It would be me in contact with that person to, I would assume that there would be a significant portion of these that would come in via an email or perhaps a telephone message, because people don't often or don't always contact you between 8 and 5. So it would be reaching back out to someone to ask them to flesh out their situation, and then bringing that to the screening subcommittee to sort of make a not final determination, but a determination whether information referral is appropriate, a referral to something like P&A or another organization, or continue on in the Olmstead process. In relation to what Scott brought up, that would be an initial contact, a second contact, and then at some point in time when the matter was discussed before the commission as a whole, that would be a third contact. And any contacts necessary to flesh out and further the inquiry or fact finding during the course of that. What I had been trying to edge towards was what we had discussed was a quick initial decision as to whether something was going to go down the road of Olmstead fact finding or no. And we had not committed as a policy, but discussed and approved of something like a shorter week, perhaps 2-week time frame, and finding, let's say, a half an hour for everyone to sit down with 2 to 3 days notice, I think is going to be a little bit of a challenge. If everyone that is on the subcommittee is willing to make that work, we can go ahead and do that. But I don't know where we want to err, whether it's on the side of accessibility, having someone's voice be heard whenever and wherever they wish to be heard, versus getting someone an answer to their initial inquiry sooner rather than later.
I think we need to be sensitive to the circumstances of the person who is applying, but I don't believe that everything should be done whenever and wherever they find it to be convenient. I think that we can have options that will be available, and we'll find out if that works for them. And if another scenario needs to be adopted, it'll come back to whoever that committee is to determine how that fits into their plans. I want to be user friendly, but we're users in this as well, and so there's got to be it's okay to have some kind of parameters on how long something might be anticipated to continue. I'm a little worried about that in this upcoming session with everything being live streamed, and what we can do to make it convenient and available, because we want to be that, of course. But I don't think that all of us necessarily need to be 100% flexible if an individual has the ability to be flexible in when a setup might be. Again, this has got to be within the purview of the people who are on that group. If they can meet, if the judge has got stuff scheduled and he's on that committee and he can only meet after, I don't know, pick a number, 5:30, then that's going to be when he's going to be available, or nobody else is going to be able to have him as a part of the group. So and I'm not picking on you, Judge Romanic, but you see what I mean. Your life is scheduled around other people, and so is everybody else's. So I don't know. It seems to me that I like the option of having somebody being able to participate if they want. They can submit written or recorded stuff, I imagine, if they wish to do that instead, making it easy and adaptable in that regard. And I think we're spending too much time talking about this. I think we can figure it out.
Speaking of the judge, he does have his hand raised, Wally.
Yes. Yes, Judge.
I just wanted to throw in, when we brought this up, it was somebody makes an inquiry, we take it to the full commission. Then we said, well, maybe we should have, because instead of Dan making decisions like that, having a small group. Well, Dan's met with the person, and then all of a sudden saying, okay, 2 or 3 more people, now we want to bring in that person again to tell us what their issue might be, to see whether it qualifies to move forward. I don't think we need to hear from that person again. Obviously, we can say, well, we don't know enough, Dan, go get more, or let's call that person and find out if they can talk with us, or let's move it up to the Olmstead. If we're going to say every time Dan's meeting with them, and then we're going to go ahead and say, okay, now let's try and put something together with this committee and let this person making the inquiry meet with us as well. We might as well go up to the full commission and go from there. I see we're adding a cog in there where we didn't anticipate. That's why we were doing it. I thought we were doing it to kind of, let Dan not have to make every decision for each one, but he can bring that information forward. And it will be a time crunch to get all parties involved. It's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Judge. I'm wondering if we don't have the requirement that the person bringing the issue before us has to be part of the second. Can we do some of this by email, or does it always have to be a 20 to 30 minute meeting? Right now, we do not know, what the workload will be here, and how often we'd have to meet. But I'd like to think that we don't have to have a subcommittee meeting every time you talk to somebody, Dan. So.
Okay.
But I would think there'd be a way that you could identify this through a written statement of here's what's been requested of us.
And I will incorporate that into our policy. Do we wish to, at this point, count noses for those that would like to be on the subcommittee and discuss any sort of rotation?
A rotation may be a good idea. See where you go with that.
Pardon me, Judy? I missed that.
Maybe the idea of a rotation is the right thing. I don't know anybody who wants to be sort of on there forever, maybe, but maybe a rotation is the thing to do. I'm throwing it out for you to think about throwing out there.
And maybe the opportunity to opt out if you'd prefer not to be.
Or if there's a conflict of some sort, you've served on the board for the group, whatever,
Right. This is Teresa. I like that idea, and maybe having a couple people and an alternate, so to speak, that can come in if the other commission members cannot participate. My other question is, I'm not sure it's clear to me the decision making at these levels. So if I can just quickly ask about that. So Dan would receive the initial inquiry and get as much information as he can. And then is it going to the subcommittee for review and discussion? And the individual may come in and present to that subcommittee or talk with them if they so choose. And does the subcommittee then just bring it forth to the commission, or are they making some kind of a decision?
I think I'd go back to you, Dan, to say what's your concept on what you'd like to see?
Well, my concept would be, this is what I have jotted down, that after the initial, fleshing out of the inquiry, an email summation to the commission members that are involved in that, we'll call it an initial screening process, a recommendation, and ask if they concur and ask if they wish to have some sort of larger meeting.
So do you see the subcommittee making a decision, Dan?
I see them having veto power over whatever my recommendation might be, or at the very least, they would be the ones that would be saying, yes, this is appropriate to bring on, this is appropriate for information referral, this is appropriate to refer out of our organization because it doesn't quite meet our parameters.
So you
Here's my reminder, which I've been saying.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Teresa.
I'm sorry. So you do see them as making a decision. They can actually screen out inquiries from going up to the full commission?
What I heard Dan say is that he would make a recommendation. Here's the action I'm recommending. Do you agree or disagree? So, I mean, he may have started that decision process with what you're submitting, right, Dan?
Yes, or at least that was my thoughts.
Okay,
Judy?
I'm a bit of a constitutionalist here, and I just think we need to remember that we work for the citizens of North Dakota. It isn't the other way around. And I don't think that there should be any kind of administrative decision made. I don't care how remarkable the person is who's doing the screening, who makes the final decision. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's somebody from the governor's office. They are not the ones to make the final decision without some kind of input from the people who are affected by it. So it seems to me really critically important that the information be assembled by Dan, which he's certainly capable of doing and probably less threatening to an individual if it's just one person to do that. And bring that information to this smaller group who will vet it a bit. Do you need more information? Is there more than enough? Can you make a decision? And that there will be a recommendation from that little bit smaller group. I understand, Judge Romanic, what you're saying about not adding another loop here, but either it's got to come directly to the whole bunch, or there has to be somebody who's vetting it on behalf of the citizens of North Dakota, because and it shouldn't be someone who doesn't have a connection in some way with the citizens of North Dakota. So that's, I realize I have a big, strong bias there. You can go ahead and put pins in Judy Lee dolls after the meeting. It's been done before too, but that's the way I think about that stuff.
Well, this is Teresa, and I would agree. I think the decision needs to be made by the full commission.
All right, can I clarify a detail then? If it is the thought of the initial screening commission that referral out of the organization or information and referral would be the appropriate resolution for an inquiry, that would be communicated back to the individual, but there would be that individual's inquiry would be placed before the commission at the next available meeting, and there would be the opportunity for them to appear before the commission and discuss whatever recommendation had been made. Is that what we're thinking here?
This is Teresa. I believe so, Dan. I think so the recommendation wouldn't come from you. It would actually come from the subcommittee to the full commission. Is that right? Yeah.
Okay.
Is that going to be quick enough for people who are bringing, if we're meeting quarterly? What's the commission's thought on that? It's okay with me if that's what you want to do, but I'm saying, does anybody have any concerns about time?
I think if there are concerns like that, Wally, we may need a special meeting.
Yeah. Agreed.
This is Judge Romanic. I like the idea, but having a subcommittee that doesn't do anything but push it forward to the whole committee, then let's get rid of the subcommittee. Dan puts a report together and Dan makes his recommendation and it comes up to us. I think initially he brought that forward to he didn't want to make a decision to refer something out because it was a one-time issue. And, whether it should be an Olmstead issue, it was, multiple parties involved or affected. And that's why we talked to, I think, a subcommittee. If we're not going to do that, then it's senseless to have a subcommittee look at something and then to shift everything up to the whole commission when the whole commission's going to get it anyway. We're putting in a layer that doesn't need to exist, if that's what we're going to do.
I was on the same kind of track with you, Bruce, on that.
How would you feel, Judge, if the subcommittee got background information and made a recommendation? Not a decision, but a recommendation.
Well, I guess then we're all going to come together as the whole commission and review it again. But it's fine. It's like Wally said, it's not even an appeal. You're just sending it forward and someone's not screening. You're just looking at it and then bringing it to the commission, which, is fine. But we're tasking out duties and nothing's being accomplished. That's my thought.
Okay, let's go back then to Dan assembling information and bringing it to the whole group. I just think that the whole group has got to be involved in this decision as far as what the recommendation is at some point.
Yeah, good.
So we'll revisit the policy and I don't want to say truncate it, but eliminate what people have seemingly agreed is a duplicative step. Is that what I'm hearing? It's going to be me emailing out a summation to the whatchamacallit, commission as a whole, and at that point requesting that people respond to a poll for some sort of special meeting. Do we want to, are these going to be as they come in? Will these be, we want to do these on a monthly basis and we'll aggregate them that way? Or am I putting the cart in front of the horse by asking that question?
Dan, this is Scott again. My gut instinct is that we're not going to get dozens of them coming in. They're going to come in rather sporadically. So my recommendation would be to just do it as they come in. Otherwise, if we say once a month, it'll just push back the period of time until stuff is done. So I would say just do it as they come in.
Okay. That seems very good. I just wanted to make sure that everybody had acknowledged that they know how we're scheduling this. So if I get complaints that there's more than one in a month, I'll point them at you, Scott.
Yeah, Carlotta, you want to?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my question is, because this process now is going to take a little bit longer because we don't have a subcommittee on there, and some people might not be appropriate for Olmstead and they're going to have to wait a month to find out. Will we be able to have some simultaneous referral over to like protection and advocacy, for example, while they are also doing this so that people don't have to wait when they're going to maybe just be denied anyway?
It's a great question. I was thinking the same thing myself. Because there's got to be some things that Dan's going to be able to say that isn't an Olmstead. We have a pretty good handle on that. You know, same thing that the Ethics Commission is now facing in North Dakota. You know, they've turned down a number of actions that have been brought to them. And of course, they're acting as a commission too, but.
Well, this is Teresa. I can't think of anything that would prevent a referral to P&A, regardless of the process the Olmstead Commission is looking at.
And at the very least, if it seems appropriate to me, I can give them the information and they can initiate contact with protection and advocacy on their own, should they see fit.
Well,
and I shouldn't say it wouldn't be limited to protection and advocacy. You know, as Scott had mentioned, they do some work as well. I think the other SILs do as well. But you're right, it's totally up to the individual in terms of pursuing things down other roads.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure Dan will be amending this as we go. You know, we'll see how the process works, and then and hopefully continue to improve it. Scott, this has to feel, Judy, a little bit like the legislature. We're making sausage together.
We move faster. We've only got 80 days.
Wally, it is 2:00, and Jerry is in our audience, so
That's great. We do have our schedule for 2, so we can. Is there anything else on this? Or are we satisfied that Dan has marching orders with this? I'm thinking, Dan, does anybody have any other directions that we want to give Dan in regard to this? We're going to bring it to the full commission. He'll make reports for us. Okay. Privileged today to have Jerry Tevens with us. And Dan, if you want to introduce Jerry to the commission.
I don't know who exactly is off mute right now, but well, our guest is here. She's the Director of Special Education from DPI, and she's been asked to come and present on DPI and their relation to local school boards for special education. And additionally, the judge had a specific question that I've tried to answer some bits of about the Setting D facility for special education students that Fargo is currently renovating Lewis and Clark for. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for inviting me. I just want to clarify, Daniel, because I didn't get any specific questions ahead of time. I guess what I did get was, what is DPI doing to ensure that local districts are fulfilling their legal obligations to students with disabilities under IDA? And so the PowerPoint I sent you was kind of an outline to address that. So I'm not sure how you want me to proceed. Do you want me to proceed with kind of a brief overview of what we are doing in regard to that, and then get to the question? I look to you for guidance.
If you could go through the PowerPoint, Jerry, there are some of us, like myself, that have a limited amount of familiarity with the area. There are others here that have 20 plus years worth of familiarity with it. So I think that if everybody will bear with us, educating the ignorant like myself, we can spend the first few minutes on that and then get to more specific questions.
Okay. So should I share my, let me
Yes,
see
please.
here. Let me see if I can share here without messing it up. Okay. All right, are you seeing my slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I'm just going to move forward. And as I said, this was kind of the question that was presented to me. So I just wanted to give you just a real brief kind of overview of our role as a state agency when it comes to administration of special education in North Dakota. And many of you, and again, for those of you that know special ed really well, please forgive me if this is a lot of redundancy to you, but again, I wanted to provide this overview. So, the purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that really emphasizes special education and related services, and those services that are designed to meet that child's unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So there's a variety of ways that we work towards this. And as a state education agency, specifically the special education responsibilities that are put forth on a state education agency federally and as well as in our state law, these are some of the roles of the agency as we provide that general supervision of IDA in our state. And so I'm going to just recap these real briefly, and then I'll move forward with some of what we've done during COVID to assist with this, excuse me. But technical assistance, of course, to our local districts, to our special education units related to administration of special ed and how to assure our kids with disabilities are getting the services and the parents their procedural safeguards. We do some of this through providing PD and training, integrated monitoring activities. So whether this is through any dispute resolution or complaint investigations that come forth to us, we have the responsibility to monitor units throughout the course. We kind of do it cyclically. It can be based on data that shows that there are possibly some needs for improvement, can be based on dispute resolution results. It can be based on maybe some fiscal management questions, etc. Also, as a state agency, and you'll see my last bullet here, state performance plan, we are required federally to have a 6-year state performance plan, which has 17 indicators that we measure. We set targets, measure progress, and report annually to the federal government. And for example, and I won't go into all of these 17 indicators, but one of those indicators is, for example, the graduation rate of students with disabilities. And, the second indicator is that, monitoring the dropout rate of students with disabilities. So we look at the data annually also per district, and there are certain compliance standards to some of that. So that may require some more focused monitoring of a particular special ed unit and consequently the districts. Effective dispute resolution, we need to have a process in place that assures that to districts and parents, there's various options for addressing and handling disputes. And as I said, fiscal management, we get federal allocations from the Department of Ed, specifically the Office of Special Ed Programs. And so our responsibility is to oversee these allocations, use the state share of these for these activities that I've got listed here, as well as to allocate this to our local special ed units so they in return use those funds for providing services for students with disabilities. And I already talked a little bit about improvement and correction, but if we do, through our monitoring, find a unit or a district out of compliance, then we have a process in place for working with them to improve, to correct their non-compliance, and we follow that up for a year. Data on processes and results, that's kind of our data about those indicators in that state performance plan. So we collect data, we monitor our progress as well as the local level progress. And all of this is intended to result in better outcomes for students with disabilities, improved results. This is just a little quick graphic of those areas that of general supervision that we're required to, that I listed just in the previous slides, just the puzzle that the Office of Special Ed Programs put together, but it kind of gives you an idea of how all of these different responsibilities fit together towards our desired outcome. So are there any questions on that before I move on? That was a really fast kind of overview of what our role and responsibility is as a special ed unit. But again, there are 31 special education units in the state, and those are the units that we specifically work with as well as with the districts, but typically through the special ed unit.
Jerry, this is Teresa. Would you be able to give an example of where you may have found, some kind of non-compliance with a special ed district and how you have responded to that?
Yeah, an example that would come quickly to me would be that if there was an allegation filed, for example, by a parent that the school district was not following the student's IEP. And when a parent or a district files a complaint, they are required to identify allegations that violate IDA and also propose a resolution. So if we, in fact, once we get the complaint in, we look through it, identify that it meets the requirements for a complaint investigator, we assign an investigator to the complaint, and then there's an interview process, file reviews, that type of thing. If we do find that a district is out of compliance or a unit, then what is required, they're required to provide to us a corrective action plan. And they typically have 90 days from the time we found them out of compliance to submit that corrective action plan. Once we receive it, we look at it, approve it, and then typically they have up to a year to correct, but that is generally done, much sooner than that. Some of the corrective actions mostly will include training for staff to assure that if there was case manager error or school district wasn't following the IEP, that type of thing. So there's training to assure they understand the requirements of IDA. There have been times when compensatory services education is also required if a child has lost or didn't receive some of the services that he or she was entitled to in that IEP. Does that answer your question, Teresa?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yes, I think it's helpful for people to hear some examples of what might be happening. So thank you for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Any other questions kind of on generally our responsibilities?
This is Carlotta, and so you find the school districts may be out of compliance if a complaint has happened from a parent. Do you find out of compliance when you're doing your monitoring of districts as well?
Yes, we do. Like I said, annually we do a data drill down, which is what we're actually doing this week. So I broke away from that for a bit, but we do a data drill down of all the indicator data, look at each district or each unit, and we rank the districts and units, those that are below the state level of compliance for each of the, I shouldn't say of compliance, but the state level or state average, that's what I'm trying to say, sorry, state average. Then we look to looking at those particular units, and what we do is we do a complete file review. We form, this is probably a lot more information than you want, but we form kind of a hypotheses or hypotheses plus around what are some questions we have about the units and the districts within that unit as it relates to FAPE, a free appropriate public education, whether it might be the least restrictive environment, preschool data, that type of thing. And so we look to that, we form hypotheses, and then we start doing file reviews, which we'll pick samples for each of the hypotheses. Then we do file reviews and look to whether we through the file review found that yes, they were in compliance, the LRE was identified correctly, that type of thing. And if not, then we look to gathering further information, and that typically results in on-site interviews of the school staff. And so after those on-site interviews, then we will determine from there whether the hypotheses that we formed around certain requirements, if there are questions of compliance or not, and if we find them out of compliance, then we move forward with the corrective action process.
Jerry, this is Carlotta again. Is there, there used to be like on-site monitoring that you'd go and do with districts. Do you still do that, or is that just based upon the drill down of the data?
Well, it's based on the drill down of the data, yes, but we still do typically every year 2 on-site visits for sure of the 2 special ed units we've identified. We are doing a little bit different process this year because we are trying to align our process more with our general ed counterparts in our education equity and support unit. And, under Title I, there are districts that are identified for targeted support. And so we are trying to align our work more closely throughout the department. And so the districts that we're selecting this year are districts that were chosen for targeted support through the Elementary Secondary Education Act responsibilities. Now this year, most of our visits, it will depend what we find after our monitoring begins, but they may be more virtual than on site. But our opportunity to review student files virtually really does help us a lot and cuts down a lot of the actual physical, on site.
Jerry, I'm curious, as a lawyer who used to work in this area, are there many private lawsuits, or does the work that your group does take the need away from parents to have to file lawsuits against school districts?
Well, I guess I would say no, there aren't many, and I don't know sometimes if that even comes to our knowledge of. Typically, our processes can remedy the situation. You know, we offer several levels, and we have IEP facilitation where we train and hire IEP facilitators. And this is a step not every state in the nation offers this, but we do. And if there is some concern, you know, a difficulty developing an IEP, the school or the parent can ask that we provide an IEP facilitator. This often takes care of the dispute issues. We also offer mediation, and that is also a step that can result in a signed agreement between the school and the family. And if those aren't chosen or those don't work, then we have the complaint investigation option. But usually it's taken care of then. I know from time to time there may have been parents or districts that reach out to their private attorneys, but we aren't typically too involved in those processes, to be honest. And I don't think there's very many of them.
Yeah, it sounds like this is a very good outlet for those kind of issues, you know, the work that you folks are doing. So.
And we do a lot of TA by telephone. So, you know, parents will call us, districts will call us. All of our coordinators on staff here, they each have assigned areas of the state that they are kind of the lead TA person for. And so a lot of time is spent just helping, whether it's a parent or the district, kind of think through, problem solve, give some other options. So we try to do that before it gets to any dispute process. And that's been quite successful. Any other questions? So what I have in the next few slides here then are just reference to our DPI COVID-19 guidance page, and the staff at DPI, you know, all of our units within DPI and all special ed included have spent a lot of time since the beginning of this pandemic in March, trying to provide as many resources as we can. It's been more challenging because federally we haven't received a whole lot of guidance from the Office of Special Ed Programs, the federal office. As you know, federally, sometimes any guidance that they work to put out has to go through a vetting process. And so we've been kind of promised that more is coming out in the next few days, but it still hasn't been vetted by their attorneys, you know, at the federal level. But anyway, we have worked really hard as a state agency to provide as much guidance as we can. So on the DPI COVID website, you will see, and I just did a screen print of these pages, but it goes more specifically to a Q&A section, and there is a special education section here as well. And so when you click on the special education section, then we have a page there that has a variety of resources, whether it relates to school reentry considerations for students with disabilities, implementation guidance, parent guidance, and other resources. And so those are all available there. And this slide here specifically talks about what we've been doing during this COVID epidemic. And so I really feel, as does the department and Superintendent Baszler, that communication is essential, you know, in times like this. This is uncharted territory. We've never experienced anything like this. So our sincere effort to provide whatever technical assistance we can. So the special ed office has held monthly calls with our parent support and advocacy groups. We've also had monthly calls with the special education unit directors and coordinators, which I see I didn't put on this slide, but so those have been monthly touch bases to get any additional questions, provide additional resources. Really, the parent support and advocacy group calls have really helped us get the pulse for what are some of the concerns of the families out there, that type of thing. Interagency collaboration, I think, has been essential as well. And, you know, just working with our other, sister agencies and just recently a resource came out from the Department of Human Services, specifically related to in-home support for families. And as many of you know, when schools go to hybrid method or distance learning, we have many families this is a challenge for because they are they need to work, and if they need to be home with their children when they need to access school in that way, it really does become a challenge. So I really feel that working together, our agencies and, you know, recognizing these hardships has made an impact as well. I already talked about our resources. Most recently, we just created a new resource on online learning for students with disabilities. And this has also been an area where students, if the students are participating in their schooling by distance learning, it may be that the virtual learning mode that the school has used, or perhaps a parent has chosen another distance learning mode. The concern is, you know, who provides accommodations for students with disabilities. So we have put some guidance out there, you know, just assuring or recognizing or reminding people that it is still the local education district's responsibility to assure that if students are enrolled in these virtual platforms, that their accommodations and modifications are being addressed. And you may also, many of you know that with the ESSER and the CARES Act funds, the elementary secondary education relief funds, and then there's been the CARE Act funds. A lot of dollars have been directed to the local districts, and because of the way this was set up, the funds did go directly to the local education agencies. And so special education units were invited to work with their districts if there were special education costs that were, you know, had come about because of COVID. There's also the state had a certain percentage of CARES Act funds, and so we have used those dollars to, a couple examples here specific to special education, was to provide a teacher shortages grant, which went to the Minot State University. Probably many of you have heard about this. And we did have 4 applications for these funds. Minot State University was selected because their project addresses the shortage by providing a 2-year course program for paraeducators. And as you know, paraeducators work with our students with disabilities. Many of them have been working in this for a number of years and either don't have the financial capability, need the job, you know, can't take the time off from their work to take courses at a university. So this grant enables them to do that. Currently, there's about 40 paras enrolled in this program, and the grant that we provided from the state level covered 29 paras, but the Minot State University worked with the Center for Persons with Disabilities, and there were a couple grants that the Center for Persons with Disabilities had, which is enabling them to train additional paras, particularly paras who are of diversity and who will be able to be a teacher in the classroom that looks like many of our diverse students. So I think that's really exciting. One of our other grant opportunities is for each of the special education units to apply for an additional $3,000 to use for early childhood special education programs. And this is specific to whether they need additional dollars for assessment tools for this young population, whether they need it for professional development, training, other expenses that may be particularly necessary because of COVID, that type of thing. And we are just getting these applications in now. And then there's the education core funding, which was additional funding, and all of these are on our website with more details, but I won't go through all that right now. But additional education core funding to our districts that just came out. And then there's broadband assistance grants, which address districts' opportunity to provide technology needs to families who may not have, you know, internet access, that type of thing. So that's just real quick in a nutshell. So I just wanted to give you opportunity now if you have some additional questions, or if there's something, I know there was one question about the Level D facility, but if there's something else that you wanted me to address before we get into that, I'm open to it.
Jerry, this is Brenda.
Mhm.
And so I think I was involved in the writing of 4 IEPs and CLPs or ICPs, whatever the districts are calling them. And so I've heard everything from, because when I questioned the reduction of services, I've heard everything from, well, the special ed kids already get more than the other kids are getting. And so that was explained exactly the way they said it was, we're already letting some special ed kids in school more days than the other kids are getting. And then this morning I heard in a conversation about a child who desperately needs to be in school 5 days, mom was even willing to settle for 3, was that the school just didn't have the ability or the capacity to educate, to have the special ed kid comes more than what they're coming, which is the 2 days a week. So I just want to let you know those were 2 new things that I hadn't heard until recently, that the general, they're already getting more than the general ed kids. And then today to hear that a school doesn't have the ability or the capacity. And so again, we're writing the ICPs based on what the ability and the capacity of the schools are and their policies, which are pretty unilateral for special ed kids. And now to be told outright, we just don't have the ability or the capacity. So I just wanted you to know that that's kind of some new language out there, at least on the eastern part of the state.
Well, first I can tell you those are wrong answers, Brenda.
I knew you were going to say that, Jerry.
And I need to ask, did I stop sharing my desktop?
I can't see your desktop, so I would say
okay,
yes.
So you can see me? Okay, good.
I can see you.
I didn't want my PowerPoint still showing. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you.
I just want you to be aware of new language that I'm hearing.
And I appreciate that. And I have to tell you, and I am thankful to P&A and to our parent groups for referring parents to us, because I've had a number of calls the last few weeks, and parents are calling to express their concerns and what they're hearing from the districts. And so with the parents' permission, we usually follow up with the district, try to, problem solve here and make sure that everyone is understanding what the requirements of the law are and being a bit more, I think that these times really, call on us to be more creative, and it's difficult. And for some children, especially our children with more severe, needs, virtual learning is tough, but it doesn't mean that it isn't possible, So that's what we try to reach out to and just help problem solve. But so like you said, that makes my heart hurt when I hear that they're getting more than general ed and that we don't have the ability. Yeah. So again, wrong answers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry, this is Judy or Wally or Leslie or whoever is running the show here. I just want to mention one thing. I know that there's a big struggle in finding subs and in finding staff. I am not saying that, I agree with Jerry that the law says it has to be done. But I know that I have seen several messages recently talking about, well, in one program, which doesn't relate to special needs kids, where they weren't able to do it at all because they couldn't get enough staff members because there aren't enough teachers to go around, there aren't enough subs to go around. And so I know that the schools are struggling, the ones with which I keep in touch, and that's about 25,000 students worth here in our 2 metros. So I think everybody needs to work together to make this happen. I don't know anybody who loves this. The people who are living in senior citizens facilities have been held prisoners since the second week in March, and they're not very happy about this either if they are any more alert enough to be able to notice it. So this pandemic has created situations that are far beyond what one might ever have anticipated. I don't think that means we should forget any of these, but we also have to recognize the constraints that come from trying to appropriately socially distance and be cognizant of all of that. I wanted to tell the group about a young friend I have who's a teacher in one of the local area schools, and she loves dealing with special needs kids. She has brothers who have some special needs, and she just has a special, wonderful personality that connects with these children. She is in a room with one more team teacher. So there are 2 teachers, there are 6 students, and there are 6 paras. So I'm telling you that because this district is doing its utmost to be able to meet the needs of these children, but it's taking 8 people to provide services to 6 students. Not only is that expensive, but finding the people who can do that work properly. And she's already been injured and these are elementary students, folks. That's where our highest numbers are. I know you all know that. So it's a challenge to find people who can do this with patience and when they are at risk. You know, our local school districts, and in fact throughout the state, we've seen it in other places too. The number one issue on negotiations between teachers and school boards has been safety of the staff. And in large part, it's because of the kinds of injuries that take place. And I know that because of a family member who's a principal of a big school in another state. So I absolutely understand how important it is to meet the needs of these children, but I also absolutely understand what kind of challenges there are in meeting the ones with the most severe behavioral outbursts. And I also have traditional learning kids, parents, who contact me, and other legislators do as well, because they're very concerned about the way the disruptions in a mainstream classroom are affecting the traditional learners when they have to leave the classroom 2 or 3 times a day. But they don't dare talk up to anybody because they're going to get beaten down. So this is an issue that we all need to work on together to resolve. But there also has to be some understanding of what some of the challenges might be, particularly during this pandemic time. I think DPI and Jerry have done a great job of putting together the information she's just reviewed. We know that we're not perfect here yet, but we're not serving anything perfectly. I am not forgiving inappropriate or ignoring behavior of any district. That's not it at all. But please, can we all try to work our way through this pandemic and then move on in the best way that we can through it, and back to what we hope will be a circumstance in which those students with 6 students in a classroom and 8 adults will be able to have a better learning environment for themselves as well. This is a difficult time for those staff members as well. So I just wanted to make that point about these wonderful teachers and paras that are in that classroom.
Thank you, Judy. And thank you, Jerry, for the elucidation that you've given us here. This has really been enlightening. Now there's that one other issue, Dan, of the stakeholder input that we want to talk to Jerry about. So.
The judge had, indicated that he had a question about whatever advice DPI may have given to Fargo on the establishment of a separate setting D facility for children.
Okay, well, I'm trying to think of where to even begin, because I want you to know that this level D, which level D has always not sat right with me. I don't like it called level D. When we determine where a child's needs can best be met, that's their least restrictive environment. And, level D is basically a separate facility. So, but before, and we've had conversations with Fargo. Now, DPI does not have a stance on this. Our stance is that an IEP team needs to determine individually for each child where and how and what is the best way to meet the needs of that child. Now, I know when it, as we all know, when it comes to children with severe behavioral challenges, the safety of the child, the safety of the rest of the children, the safety of the staff, those have to all be considered. But number one needs to be considered, what type of interventions does a child need to help them learn appropriate ways of communicating. You know, when a child has a behavior, they're trying to communicate something to us, you know, whether it's a need or a want or a frustration or what it might be. And so the team really needs to individually look at each child and, you know, determine what kind of interventions are needed, and then how can we best meet those intervention needs. And so, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but so when we do a blanket, oh, and I don't know if I'm even saying this correctly, but a blanket, you know, we're going to have this level D facility where we address all these needs. It kind of makes me cringe, but I understand, you know, where Fargo and West Fargo are, you know, I understand what's gotten them kind of where they are. I know that they had many, many meetings with stakeholders, and the board, you know, took all that stakeholder input into consideration. Honestly, I can't personally tell you. I know where that level D facility standing is right now, because we haven't been so much pulled into that. Our TA and all our conversations that we get, or any questions we've been asked by Fargo, West Fargo, the surrounding communities, and this isn't just that part of the state. You know, there's a lot of discussion around this, but nobody's taken that step to really, as Fargo has. But it all has to go again back to the individual needs of the child, and by case. And you know, there are, well, I shouldn't probably say this because some might agree with me, but they're, you know, really looking at what is available and what type of interventions the child needs and how they could be accessed. Can be, that's where this creativity has to come in, and the training of the staff and what type of staff the district has available to provide these interventions. And if they don't, how can they get access to that? So it's so multifaceted, and I don't think, Judge, I'm really answering your question, but personally, that's really how I feel about it. Is this is an individual based decision, and so it's worrisome. And I know other states have had facilities that they brag about that really do make a difference for children. And believe me, there are some children that a facility like that may be able to make a difference. But again, it's got to be, you know, determined on a case by case basis. And I think what, you know, Fargo and West Fargo, and Judy, you probably are much closer to this than I am, and Brenda, but is really trying to get the most qualified services and staff available for these children who need the most intervention and who need this high skill intervention. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Thanks, Jerry. I see that Brenda has a question.
Actually, I was going to respond. Again, I'm just full of good news, Jerry. I recently, and I really can't comment on West Fargo because that's kind of like in a standstill, but of course in Fargo, they're actually broke ground. I recently learned that in the Fargo Public Schools, the school social workers, who have been such an integral part of wraparound services for our children and families where there's a child with some special needs, in the past, they were able to really provide some good hands-on in the home, going to doctors. They can't do any of that anymore. They strictly are in the schools. And that was a huge component that was part of all the stakeholder meetings and the public meetings was, look, you know we need social workers in the schools who can really work with these families. And then the other thing is that, and this was a huge point of contention in both districts, was so before you get to a level D, you have to exhaust the least restrictive environments, which are in SPED language A, B, and C. Well, now Fargo has had to eliminate one level C program they had, and they were to start up a new level C program, which they couldn't do. And they've rearranged some of, and they actually may have eliminated more than one of the level C. So now these children who were getting level C services or need the level C can't obtain them. So, but then we're going to build a school where we can move them over to a level D. And the reason that they are cutting the level C is because they can't hire SPED teachers in paras. So if you can't hire SPED teachers in paras for the school you've already have to provide those services, where and how do we get those services for another school? And one of the plans was to pull from the existing staff pool. We're short right now in Fargo 6 special ed teachers. If we pull from what the pool we already have, which Judy just said, there's a difficulty with getting teachers and paras. If we pull from what we already have to staff a new school, now we're interrupting everything at our other schools, which is really the least restrictive environment. And so I think the issue is continuing to grow. And it just, when you talk about breaking your heart, to hear that these school social workers in Fargo can no longer work as closely and intently with those families, especially during COVID. I mean, these families are falling apart on a good day. And a lot of them rely on those school social workers to access that wraparound in the community and access those family supports and keep those strong connections with the schools. So, I mean, and when we talk about other states, I did a comparison of the Minnesota, theirs I think are called numbers, the level 4s are level D. So I did a comparison of the schools that were visited by Fargo and West Fargo of what they have for their staffing patterns, not just in numbers of teachers and paras, but the counselors and the therapists and the behaviorist. And the numbers don't match. And I made public comment to the Fargo Public School Board that you praise these schools in Minnesota because they're successful, and some are. But there, where Fargo is going to have 6 teachers in their level D, the other schools have like 20. And where they have paras, an in-house school psychologist, an in-house mental health therapist, and in-house social workers, and in-house behaviorists, we don't have those in North Dakota. If we did, we wouldn't have all these openings. So I think this is way beyond bricks and mortar at this time. I think it really, truly is a violation of what IDEA is about, that whole least restrictive environment. If we don't have the level Cs, we're just going to ship those kids from B to D. So you can see it's been upsetting for the last week.
Well, and just to, I mean, I don't think I have to remind anyone, but in our state, it's the local school boards, the local special ed unit boards that make decisions, on staff, on programs. When we come into play is if we receive a complaint and investigate it. So, these decisions that are being made at the local level is, their local level right. But if it does violate a child's rights, that's where, we need to be contacted. And again, we address at the student level, so just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that reminder, but I just wanted you to know that these are some additional things that are.
I appreciate you telling me. I appreciate that
coming up
very much.
Thank you.
It's concerning.
Thank you both. I know we have another agenda item coming up, or they're a little behind time on it, but I'm just wanting, before we close, are there any thoughts from the commission? We really appreciate the dialogue and the information today that both of you provided, and very educational for us all. Any other commission thoughts you want to share? Okay.
Jerry, I do have one follow-up. You had mentioned that part of the typical DPI regime is, I won't call it improvement and correction, but professional development and training. If you could forward on any materials that DPI has put out over the last few months in order to, within this extraordinary circumstances, ensure that all of the school districts are giving appropriate responses, I think the commission would find that helpful.
Sure, I can do that. Most of those resources are posted on our DPI website, because before we can send them out, we have to get them approved through management. And so if you went to the DPI COVID website, you will find a variety of resources there. The special ed page has what we've sent out, but is there, I can check to see if there's anything more. You know, we're just creating one now related to compensatory services. You know, if in the event once we get back to a normal routine of school and the team has done their assessment and determined where the child is, you know, functioning currently, and if there's been any if progress was held up because of the COVID situation or some service not being able to be provided, you know, what that compensatory services looks like. That isn't yet posted. So I don't know if you want me to send you all of those hard copy documents, or if your reference to the COVID website would meet your needs.
I don't know that we necessarily need all the hard copies, but if you could send us a copy of the compensatory services policy once that's put into place, I think that might be of interest.
Okay. Then I can, if you want me to send you the link to where those others are, I can do that too.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Thank you both again, and thank you for the time and the preparation and the efforts that you brought to our education. It's very, very helpful for the commission. Okay.
Thank you.
I guess Dan, do we have Krista Fremming available now?
We do.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hi, Krista.
Hi.
Welcome.
I also have Catherine Barchinger here with me. She is the administrator of the Medicaid autism waiver. And so she's going to go through a couple slides, just kind of giving you some background information on the waiver and some of the questions that Daniel had asked us to address. And then we'll both be available for questions here.
Yeah. Thank you.
And should we pull up the presentation, Daniel or Wally, or were one of you doing that?
I
have it, so I can.
Jerry had been controlling her own screen. We can certainly do that for you, but since you're going to be the one with that's going to be giving the presentation, it probably would work better for you to be clicking through the slides.
Yep. All right. So I have it pulled up here, and Kathy, I don't see you. Are you on your video?
I am here. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you. I just couldn't see you, only your picture.
Oh, okay. So we'll get that corrected. I'm a little leery about that. I have a dog that's really fascinated with the wind today. So we're talking about the autism spectrum waiver that goes from birth through age 13. So a child is on the waiver until their 14th birthday. Okay. The purpose of the waiver, if you want to go to the next slide, Krista. The purpose is threefold. So basically it is to provide services for a child to receive in the home, to be parent driven, meaning the parents are the primary caregiver, determine the child's cares, what they're needing. They're kind of like driving the whole focus of where their needs are and what's going on. Very much based on like the wraparound programs were in the past, and that they get the help from a team. So it's family members, the professionals working with the child, and anybody else that's important to the family. And with the goal of keeping the child in the home. Okay, who's eligible? Any child between the ages of birth through 13 or through their 14th birthday to receive care in an intermediate care facility. This is determined by what we call as a Vinland 3, which is a questionnaire that the family completes of can they tie their shoes? Do they leave with a stranger? Do they know the difference between a stranger and a family member? Those kind of things. And if they get a score with deficits in that area, then they would be qualifying for the waiver. And they have to have an autism diagnosis that has been professionally determined. And they have to be living in their parents' home or caregiver's home. And if I talk too fast, wave at me and I will try to slow down, but I'm a very fast talker. So the waiver has, the waiver has 3 services, service management, which is up to 16 hours a month, respite, which is up to 40 hours per month, and then assistive technology, which is up to $5,000 for the lifetime of them being on the waiver. So assistive technology can range from a weighted blanket to help them calm down to a communication device or a program on the communication device that'll help them become more independent. The focus is helping them deal with the deficit created by the autism diagnosis. And then the respite is a break for the primary caregiver. So it's just to help them be able to spend time with their other children in the home, or to be able to go do something without that child, their fear of the child running away or having to focus on that child. They can focus on their own health. Okay. And then, so the questions have been about how many slots are on the waiver, and there's currently 96 slots on the waiver. The waiver started in 2010 with 30 slots, and as we have slowly progressed, we've gotten up to the 96 slots now. Also, the waiver started at bringing birth through age 4. And so we've actually moved up to age 14 now, so which is really good. So the problem with the slots, though, is that we can't duplicate a slot, which means that we have the 96 slots. And so if one child comes off, then we can't put another child on that until the next waiver year. And for the autism waiver, the waiver years run November 1st to October 31st, I'm sorry. So if a child comes off the waiver in November of this 2020, because they've been on and they get screened off in November, we can't fill that slot again until the next November. That's the bad thing about waivers, is that we can't duplicate the numbers.
Kathy, can I interrupt for just a second? I think Carletta has a question for you.
Yes, it's about the slots. So on those ones where if a child comes off in January, you cannot fill it again until November. Is that a CMS rule, or did North Dakota put that in specifically?
That's a CMS rule. So I also, if you remember the medical fragile waiver, we used to have it so we had 15 active, 25 per year. So then when that child came off in those 15 active, we could add another kid because we had those extra slots. This waiver does not have that ability yet. We've been talking about, Jody, my supervisor, and I have been talking about possibly looking at that, trying to figure out how we can get that in. DD has emergency slots, which is another option. We don't have that option in this waiver either. We have a strictly 96 slots and they're all used. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And Teresa also has a follow-up question. You're creating a lot of questions now. So
I do that.
So, thank you. So, Kat, when you're looking at the slots, the last period of time you have on your chart is from 17 to the present, increased to 96 slots. But actually, we increased the slots to 96 through the 17-19 biennium, correct?
They were increased that, but we had not increased them since then. So the waiver was approved to have the 96 slots on December 6th of 2017. So legislation mandated, and then we have the 90 days to work with CMS to get them approved. And
okay, I guess my point being, we increased to 96 slots during the 17-19 biennium. We have not increased any slots this biennium, correct?
Correct.
It was put on hold by the Department of Human Services, correct? And so even though money was appropriated, we have not added those slots.
We have not requested them from CMS to add those slots to the waiver, no.
Okay. Thank you.
And Judy Lee has a question. Judy, do you want to ask your question?
That's okay. I was just going to say that would have been back. We see a lot of this stuff on a biennial basis because that's when the budget is set also. So you already got that answer, so never mind.
Okay. So, and also just on the slide, we did mention that last year we were able to add 11 new kids onto the waiver, and this year we'll be adding 14 currently. If no, and then we're always screening as their anniversary dates come on, so that might increase by a few numbers by November, but as of right now, we only have 14 slots open. Yes, Teresa.
So, sorry, but you said we will be adding 14, but the task force was told those are on hold and we're not adding any.
No, these
now.
14, it's an odd that it's the same number. It really is. But these are the 14 slots that I have open from kids that have come off in the last year.
Gotcha.
So these are the kids that have moved out of state, have screened off, parents requested no longer having the waiver. They're off the waiver, so that slot is open. So their number will still be 96. So these are the replacement. These are the replacement kids. It just happens to be the same number as the 14 that you guys are asking for.
So they're just going to be filling existing slots.
Correct. We're gonna right.
So even though money was authorized by the legislature for more slots, we are not adding more slots, right?
Right, because I cannot add them until CMS agrees to it.
But
So
we have to add, they're going to add them if we don't ask, right?
I think that one thing that might be important to understand is that the budget for the waiver actually was decreased during the last legislative session due to underspending of the waiver. And so the legislature did not direct the department specifically to add slots. The legislature said that the department may consult with the autism task force to kind of see where the budget is at and see if we should add slots. So that might be helpful for you all to understand.
Okay, and so I don't want to go back and forth all afternoon. So one more thing. And they did consult with the task force, and it was agreed that 14 more slots would be added. And the department then said, we aren't going to add those. Correct?
That is correct. So the sort of how the timing of events worked was at the February 2020 Autism Task Force meeting, of which I am the chair of. We consulted with the task force about adding potentially 14 slots that we felt would enable us to live within the appropriation, but still, serve additional children. And then March 2020 hit, and I think you all are aware of what happened then. There's been a lot of uncertainty across, all DHS programs, but Medicaid for sure, because we've had increased enrollment, and we have tried to be consistent in terms of, because since COVID hit, we always get requests to add new services and add increase eligibility for this or that. But it's certainly no different during COVID. And so we felt that we had to take a conservative stance and kind of see what happened before we added slots.
And keep in mind with the waiver that once a child is on the waiver, they also get full Medicaid. So, just to let you guys be aware of that they're not just getting these 3 services, they're getting full Medicaid services with the waiver. So, Teresa,
can I just have clarification? This is Lisa. So there's a hold on the additional slots, or those additions will move forward?
That I believe is up to Chris and Caprice. Is that right?
Yeah, at this time, I don't know when we will move forward with those slots, but we have not yet.
Lisa, again, it's probably not the time to have this discussion or the appropriate group, but that's troubling. I think it's very short-sighted, and I'm hoping that maybe it's going to take some legislative action, and Senator Lee, you know more, I'm sure. But there's a significant need by a number of families with children, autistic children, and to put these slots on hold, I'm troubled.
And thank you for sharing that, because we need to understand that even more so. So I appreciate that. That also brings me to my next slide that does say that we do have a wait list. So even with the 14 slots, we will still continue to have a wait list. So,
May I ask, excuse me, Representative Mitzka again, can you share the number that are on the wait list?
Yep, currently there's 62 children on the wait list.
62?
Mm-hmm.
62 children.
Yes.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. So
You might mention that it's on your slide on your PowerPoint. I mean, that the data
yes,
is
the slide that's on the screen. The slide that's on the screens does say that it is the 62 kids. That's what we have right now. The last child was added on 9/21. Just to give you an idea of how many kids we were adding per regular calendar year, in 2019 we added 30 children to the wait list. In 2020, as of this week, we have added 31 kids. So we're at the same amount of last year, but we are continuing to add more. So, and that the average time a child is on the wait list has been 2 years. Okay. And then I believe the other question that was asked of us is what the spending is at, and so that's what this slide is what our fiscal department has provided us. Carlotta, you have a question?
Trying to get my mute going.
It's okay. Figure out this out.
So with those kids on the wait list and you have 14 slots, so none of those kids have been added in?
None of those kids can be added in until November 1st. Those 14 slots cannot be offered to those. So in October, they're going to be doing eligibility to make sure, and then hopefully have everything ready to go for November 1st.
My next question is about children. I know that this is going through 14. Have any children aged out because we haven't increased the age?
No, every legislation year we've increased for 2 years. So the kids that were those possibility of aging out have kept moving forward. So, and hopefully this next legislation, they at least give us another 2 years.
This is Krista. I'd just like to maybe ask this group for any ideas. I mean, part of my concern, I think, as the chair of the State Autism Task Force is that I don't think that even if we added, no matter how many slots we add to this waiver, that we will never be able to truly meet the need of children with autism in our state. And that's not even speaking about all the adults who live with autism. And so I understand that this is in a very important program for the people that it serves, but I guess I would also be interested in hearing about other potential, options for providing people with services outside of Medicaid, just because we know the need is so great and Medicaid can't meet it all.
Well, this is Teresa, and I'm not sure if I have new ideas, but I'm very concerned about several things that I think are on point with Olmstead. So first of all, we have a waiting list for the waiver, and we also have plenty of money, as you guys will see from the slide that is being shown, that we have not been tapping into. We have not been increasing slots, and so waivered services, I'm not sure how we facilitate for these to get provided. The money is there for so far this biennium. As of the end of June, we had only spent, the last biennium total, we spent 21% of the money allocated. This biennium, for the first year, we'd spent 13.1% of the money allocated. We have kids on a wait list. We are not adding slots that were suggested to be added. They're put on hold. In addition to that, I was at a meeting, our task force meeting, Krista, that we had in August. Paul Coastal told us of these 17 youth at LSTC, 8 of them have a diagnosis of autism. So which is, pretty dang close to half. So I'm really concerned about how this program is being implemented, because the money is there, the way to make it happen is there. I know there are challenges right now with staffing and things like that. I'm totally aware of that and have empathy for that. But I don't feel like we are doing enough. More money is not going to help if we don't have the slots. And so
Teresa, that's twofold. Yes, we need more slots, but we also need more case managers and stuff, because this waiver is not run with like DDPMs. This is private.
I agree. And I said I don't. Yeah, I know that's a challenge.
I don't want to create the problem of having more slots and giving this families hope and then saying, well, we don't have any case managers and you're not using any waiver slots, and then you're off the waiver, because you have to use a waiver service to stay on the waiver, as you guys are very much aware. And so it's like a catch-22. So we've got to figure out, with your guys' help, how we can get more service managers to do person-centered plan of care, and how we can get more slots, and how we can get an equal balance going.
So I think to put it to the commission to say, are you guys saying we have a problem? I think the task force has discussed this. They've given you guys recommendations. Some are being implemented, some aren't. And to have that many kids on a wait list, and the increasing population in the institution, to me, this is a real concern and issue. And
Teresa, can you, besides not adding slots to this waiver, what has the task force recommended that the department hasn't done? I'm unclear on that.
Besides adding slots, so I have to think about that for a minute. But one thing is that having a wait list the way it is, because you're not adding slots, that's a pretty big issue right there itself. I'm not sure that we talked about recruitment for service managers and staff and providers. I'm not sure what's been done with regard to that. I'm not saying you guys aren't trying to do something, but we have a waiver to keep kids out of an institution, and it's not being administered so that families can take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. So are those kids that you mentioned that are in the institution, are they on the DD waiver by chance? Do you know?
Well,
are they getting services? They're
not on the waiver while they're in an institution, but they're obviously eligible for a DD or will be.
Yeah, right. Once they get back home, they'd be eligible for the DD waiver. Is that correct?
I would think. Yeah,
okay.
I would think. Since
I just wanted to check.
Yeah, ICF. Yeah. I'm not going to pretend to have the answers, you guys, and I appreciate all the challenges here, but we have underspent the money appropriated for this waiver since the very beginning, which has been, close to 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And we have more kids going in the institution that should be getting home and community-based services.
For someone who's new to this whole predicament, to see that there's 70% of the budgeted money not being spent is a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, I think that, so there's a couple of things that feed into this, and Kathy already mentioned one of them. I wish that DHS and Medicaid had full control over the labor workforce in this area, but as you all know, we don't. And there have been things that we've tried to do to recruit more providers to this area, especially service managers or case managers. The other thing is that when applied behavior analysis was pulled out of the waiver and moved over to the state plan as a service, that would have impacted the waiver spending. And I think that was definitely a good thing, because that means that all children on Medicaid have access to ABA, not just the kids on the waiver. And so I just want to make sure that you all have the full picture, because there's a lot of things that play into this.
And I just need to make a disclaimer there, because it's not all children on Medicaid that are ABA. It's just the kids with autism diagnosis that get ABA.
Right, sorry.
It's okay. I just need to put that disclaimer out there because I get a lot of recalls then. But, you know, and the other thing with the waiver is that we can only pay for 16 hours a month of service management, and we are currently paying $14.49 every 15 minutes. We only pay 40 hours of respite per month, and then the assistive technology is $5,000 per lifetime of them being on the waiver. So it's limited to what each child gets. You know, and I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, they're using a waiver service, so they're using either service management, keep service management in there so that the families can use service management as their service and not have to use respite every month and feel like it's another demand on their lives. If they need it, it's there. If they don't need it, then they don't need to use it. But they, you know, service management seems to be a helpful thing for families, and we would gladly encourage it. But our service managers are not even maxing out at 16 hours. You know, and that is up to the providers of how often they reach out to the family, how often the family reaches out to them. We continually educate them on how much, you know, what they can do. They can attend IEP meetings, they can attend all their meetings they want, you know, those kind of things. And we're not even getting 10 hours for these families, you know, on average with claims. So, you know, so the money is not getting spent because one, the hours in there. So, you know, the other thing we have a problem that, and I've been trying to figure out and talked about with task force meeting, is the fact is as we age further up on our waiver, our needs change. So when we were 4-year-olds, respite was great. Now that we're getting 12-year-olds, maybe it's not respite, maybe it's after school programs, because these 12-year-olds can't be left home alone. So not some of them can, but some of them can't. So what are we doing for these kids and these families that are stressing out that their child's turning 12? There's no daycare that there's going to take a 12-year-old because they've aged out, you know, and their needs are socialization. So do we want to isolate them in their homes and not have socialization? Do we want to dump it all into ABA time?
You're right. And I think at our most recent task force meeting, we did make a list of a few things, including what you suggested, Kat, as far as services under the waiver for the next, I guess it would be the next biennium.
Mm-hmm.
Rolanda, you have a question?
I just wanted us to also be aware that access to the waiver for a lot of kiddos is access to Medicaid. And so those kids don't necessarily have access to ABA on Medicaid because they don't even have access to Medicaid unless they are on the autism waiver. So I think that that is something that we also need to be really mindful of. You know, they might not have access to anything.
They do have limited access to ABA depending on their insurance, because our insurance commissioner did mandate that all insurances cover ABA in the state of North Dakota, but that's up to their insurance company. So some are doing age 4, some are doing for 6 months, you know, so it is limited through those other insurance companies. But so, and you're right, they're, you know, that is the big thing, is that the draw is the Medicaid. But then again, we have the other issue if we go to ABA, and that everybody's got a wait list. So even though you're on Medicaid, you get on another wait list for ABA because we only have so many BCBAs in the state of North Dakota.
So one more question: when these funds are not spent, what happens to them? Are they going to back to the general fund, the state match?
Chris, I'll defer that to you.
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I could find out, but what happens at the department level when funds are not spent? Senator Lee, did you have a question?
Lee? Yeah.
You're on mute.
Dang it. You'd think after 1,000 of these, I'd remember to hit that button. It doesn't matter which budget it is, whatever money isn't spent ends up being part of what's called roll up, which means it's left over at the end. And ultimately it goes back to the general fund in almost, but not every case, but that's generally the plan. Part of this money probably, if it is, and I'm not saying that it's being diverted from one to the other, please don't misunderstand. But part of what is foreseen as roll up in some other areas is going to be what helps keep our substance use disorder voucher in place for the current enrollees, because the appropriated money is gone because we had no idea how successful it was going to be, which is another topic entirely. But what I'm saying is some of that has to be flexible within a department, but there also are obvious needs that have to be addressed. That would be after the needs are addressed that are in a particular area. For example, there may be fewer dollars spent on long-term care and Medicaid right now. I'm just using this as an example because the population in long-term care facilities is down. And so those dollars that may have been appropriated for that would be part of the roll-up in my example. But that doesn't mean that they, anyway, it's more complicated, but that kind of tells you where it goes. It goes back up to the department and then into the general fund again at the end. I think the important thing is there's no carryover in a particular column on the budget. That's the better way to put it.
You've given us a lot to consider. Appreciate the world that you're having to navigate there. Are there any other questions here for Kathy or Krista? Anything else you want to present to the commission?
No, just if you guys can think of any way we can get more service managers or, more services or what the needs are out there. I know there's a lot more needs for 18-year-olds that are coming in that are getting a lot of requests for, but we'll gladly hear them out and see what we can help with.
Yeah, but appreciate all you've offered today. Thank you very much for coming and preparing for us.
Thanks for having us.
Very educational.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, what I might suggest, we've all been staring at our screen for 2 hours. If we just take a brief walk around break or something, just to get up from your chairs. We have a few more items here on Dan's work plan that we need to address. Anybody else need just a get out of the chair break?
I think that's a great idea, Wally.
Yeah. Let's come back in 5 minutes.
Well, you probably have to take roll again because no one will come back in the end,
That's always the challenge.
unless they have their video on.
I went outside to get the mail, and there's a chilly wind blowing out there right now, so that woke me up really. Well, I have to see if Dan comes back.
Yeah, that's true. Hopefully he does. He's back.
There we go.
Or if I turn my camera back on.
Okay. All right. I hope that gave just a little bit of relief. I get into Zoom brain after a while. I was at a school last week, and they took breaks where they would use music, and they would there was some meditation that went on, and all those things. It was. There are some people really learning how to use Zoom well.
Did you say they use meditation or medication?
Well, we had some meditation. Yeah, just relax the mind and the eyes. Okay, well, let's resume. We've got a little more work to do here. Dan, I want to make sure we cover the last things on the agenda that you want to make sure are taken care of. We kind of ran by your commissioner report. You want to take that prior to the business plan, work plan?
Well, I can summarize. Over the past couple of months, I've made contact with the Minnesota and North Carolina offices that are going through much of the same processes. And they have a, I don't know, email listserv and meetings set up. So hopefully I'll be able to pick their brains and sort of leverage the fact that there are other people than us going through a plan of, well, a process of Olmstead plan reformation. And actually, what I've been discussing with those two offices is what their plan reformation or revision process looks like, since that's going to be a big piece of what I hope to be doing over the next few months. I know that we had discussed this earlier in the year, but what with the current extraordinary circumstances, I'd sort of scrapped a plan to have in-person meetings with service providers, persons in the disability population, and various state agencies, and get some input that way into to supplement what we've talked about in terms of strengths and weaknesses of the system. Minnesota and North Carolina are going through the same things. So what we've been discussing and what I'm proposing to do for the next few months is sort of three separate things. And because this is relatively uncharted territory, I'd like feedback from the group on how well they think that pieces of this might work, or whether I'm trying to reach out to the right groups. Any piece of the experience that can come into play will improve my workflow. But first of all, some part of this has to be a survey of the disability population in terms of how does service provision look from, if you'll forgive me, from the outside of the state government world. Those people that are interacting with the system, DHS, DPI, housing, transportation, etc., may think of their service provision as perfectly adequate, but that doesn't necessarily tie into what people on the outside, what their impression of it is. Just in terms of public feedback, not necessarily that we're not doing great things, but if we could do one more thing, that would, be something that helps tie everything together. So what North Carolina and Minnesota have done is email surveys or web-based surveys going out to a specific population where you have emails from, but also asking people to turn around and complete a web-based survey, bring that out to people that are in the community, but that might not be immediately identified. Also, a series of, like we're doing, online meetings with the note, with the understandable drawback that you are then targeting the population that has the technology and the savvy to participate in something like this. And what both Minnesota and North Carolina has done is to to increase participation, narrow those down. I mean, you can have general meetings, also narrow those down into, we'd like to talk to persons in the DD world. We'd like to talk to persons in the mental health and substance abuse world. So it's a little bit more targeted, so you feel that people are, you are the specific audience that we're inviting. And from my perspective, any of the commission members that have contacts, that have a Rolodex, that can help me increase the penetration of the message that those are going to be out there, I'd like to get your participation and help. Some of the text of the survey has gone out to a small listing of service providers and advocacy groups to help with language, just so that whatever I'm saying is not going to turn people off by, when they open up the survey, it uses language that isn't inclusive. Let me see. Third thing that is referenced on there is a phone survey, which is something that I am playing with and proposing to do, but that will again depend on a relatively identified world of persons. It may be more appropriate for talking to providers and or specific advocacy groups. And I'm not sure whether or not I want to hold town meetings on the phone or just have sort of interviews. I put out, Minnesota did a services survey recently, and I provided the text of that to everybody. The Minnesota Olmstead Implementation Office had a listing of persons that they had contacted in specific areas previously by other means. They went back and phone surveyed, and they gave me their instrument, and I can use that and start out that process. If anybody has any reservations about how to generate a sort of world of persons to contact, please let me know. We're generating this sort of anew. As you can see from the previous process of plan generation, the 2002 report I sent out indicated that Arlette Preston was the consultant that DHS hired, and she went out and did multiple listening sessions around the state, which generated a list of concerns, which were incorporated into the plan's policy goals. And that's the process that I'm attempting to sort of replicate and update for this, the current day. Are the concerns that are going to be raised probably roughly similar? I anticipate they will be. They generally fall within the categories that the executive order articulated. I mean, these basic needs of persons with disabilities: education, employment, housing, transportation, medical services, etc. It's just a question of, now that 18 years have passed, what are people's impressions of the system? What can we identify as strengths? What are still things that we may need to work on? I would hope for some assistance with this in terms of reaching out to individual commission members that are in the advocacy wing. And Carlotta, I look at you and Scott especially as persons that would have the type of community contacts that I would be hoping for, as well as Teresa, in terms of trying to get the type of response that we'd like. Persons in the community, persons in the service provider community, giving us some unfiltered commentary on what are we doing right, what can we do better. And that's a general outline of what I plan to do for the next few months. I provided the text of an initial email and web survey to everyone. I don't know if you have comments on that, as well as the telephone survey instrument, which is divided up by interest group and asks general questions and also more specific questions in relation to specific concerns that an interest group might have, service providers versus advocacy versus persons with disabilities in the community. Does anybody have any commentary on the instruments that they've used that I'm going to go out there in the name of the commission and try to solicit some input with?
Well, this is Teresa, and one thing I'm concerned about is telephone surveys. There's so much spam out there right now. I'm not sure a lot of people would be willing to participate in something like that.
I hear you. I muted a random call that I received on my phone during the course of this meeting. But if we can identify a world of persons that we're reaching out to, it might be possible to say, to essentially set up a phone survey with them, which might eliminate some of that tension. But it's something that I'm willing to try, that I'd like to spend some time and effort on to see if we can get a more detailed answer. Because one of the things that I am concerned about is if we're asking a 5-question internet survey, does that really get us the type of information that we'd like? Does that get us, is somebody going to be answering whichever the multiple choice options they think is closest to what they think, or are we actually capturing what somebody's input would be if we were speaking to them about those questions?
So you're saying if you make a phone survey, it would be a prearranged event, and telling somebody I want 15 minutes of your time or 20 minutes of your time?
I would hope to do it that way, and I think that would yield better results than simply, if you could give me numbers of persons that you have contact with, I'd like to spam them, as Teresa has said. Calling people up randomly these days is, as Teresa indicated, a problematic proposition. Calling them up, perhaps leaving a message, perhaps getting in contact with them by email. Yes, all of these are time-consuming measures, but I'd really like to set out a good foundation for this. And what I had been hoping to do for the past 3 to 4 months has been in-person contacts, which driving around the state of North Dakota is not a non-time-consuming proposition. So I'd like that's one of the things I'm thinking about, just to increase the quality of the contact. But Carlotta, you had a comment?
I'm thinking back on what we did with one survey that ended up being fairly successful. It is a combination of doing an email survey, and then those that did not have email, we sent out, we had them printed out. And so we had people like at the recovery centers, et cetera, helping with that. So somebody was helping with the surveys, making sure that it got in individuals' hands who may not have access to internet. So anyway, just like a combination of all of the above, so that you really are focusing in on not just being able to not hear from people if they're lacking the equipment to participate.
I mean, we can wait for this all to be done, but this is for COVID, that is. But I think that what I'm contemplating is trying to do a variety of different measures to make up for the fact that we're just not going to be physically there to do, and that's a good workaround that you're suggesting. Judge, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm just gonna, Dan, I think you're going down the right path. I haven't looked at any of the surveys that you've maybe done as examples, but there's people on the line now. There's advocates that would probably give you information or the ability to reach out to people. I think it's a good idea and a good start. Right or wrong, I brought up a couple issues to bring up here, and I think Teresa did too. And quite frankly, we heard some issues, right? We got people that are being in institutions because we're not getting enough waivers out there. And, I didn't think the answers were the greatest, but life goes on. Same with the school thing. We heard somebody say, okay, D allows you to teach in this mode, but oh, by the way, we're canceling C, so they might have to go to D. Those are things that Olmstead's probably going to be an issue. So, we're getting some issues, but I think that's a great idea. Scott probably can say, here's people you can talk to, or they might even have their ideas of the problems they're seeing for the folks that they advocate for. So, I think that's a great idea. Users of the system, we've been bringing in the folks that tell us, here's how we're helping everybody, but are they doing it in the way we want them to? And, or to the best of their ability? We all have our thoughts on that. So, we're going to have to decide at some point, what are we going to do about it as the commission? So, but I think you're going down the right path. I think you need to ask those questions, and then we got to bring it all together and say, look, here's the kind of stuff we're getting from people that we should focus on.
Scott?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I really like the idea of it being a little bit of a hybrid. We've done a couple of different surveys of people with disabilities since COVID started in order to find out kind of where they're at. And we ended up using hybrids. Some people we called, some people we emailed, some people we, went through sources, kind of third party type things, like, and so I think it's a yes and type of a situation. We're not trying to get scientific data here to where, we interview everybody in the exact same scenario and stuff like that. We're just trying to get information. So I think the more we can do to create as many different paths as possible for people to provide information, the better. It might even be, we do a mass email, and if you want to give input on this, call Daniel at this number or whatever. I think there's a lot of different possibilities in order to open up doors for folks. So,
yeah. And for anybody that's on the call, I am putting my email in the chat. So if you have suggestions, please feel free to email me. This is sort of a new thing for us and a new thing for, not being able to get in, physically in front of people is presenting some unique challenges to stakeholder input. So any suggestions that I can get, I will gladly incorporate anything. Carlotta?
Just one other point too, when we're reaching out to people about Olmstead, some folks have no clue what it is. And I often think, if in fact somebody is entitled to a loaf of bread, but they've been given a slice of bread and they think that slice of bread is fantastic, they had no idea that they were entitled to the loaf. And so I think that some basic education about what Olmstead is might really help them determine a little bit more about what they're seeing and what the needs are.
Well, I can see if I can come up with an elevator speech for the Olmstead Commission. I was thinking about that when I got this job, and hopefully over the last, year or so, my ability to articulate that has improved. So for everybody, this is a 30,000-foot overview of what I plan to be doing for the next couple of months. Are there ways of reaching out to people that I've not talked about that you'd like me to explore as an avenue for us to get some stakeholder input.
You know, the other thing is that a lot of times, you know, we have access to a lot of folks, but we're not able to like necessarily hand that directly over to you. Are there things that people that are involved with working with people that can try and assist? And I think, you know, like even in COVID right now, our recovery centers, an example, are reaching out and doing warm lines to folks, and they're having those conversations. Could they maybe start some of the helping with some of the survey and that? Just some thoughts so that it's somebody that they know, or even setting up a time for it, you know, just again, some way that you can get in and not just get hung up on.
Yeah, I mean, flyers, a general education piece, if there are places that people are still going to on a regular basis that, you know, would be a good pipeline to persons that we want to hear from, definitely I can absolutely put something like that together.
And I like what I see here on the teleconference town hall meetings. I would think with a little bit of creativity, you know, you could hold one a month or something that comes off the website, where for a half hour or an hour you answer questions, or you know, you just make yourself available, whether there's 3 or 30 people that show up for it.
I know that Julie has been doing some of those. I, you know, observed one last month, and I know that Deneen Feist has a regular series of telephone open calls that seem to be very successful in attracting a good audience. And I'm hoping to sort of reach out and piggyback off both of their efforts.
Another idea that I have is we've often in the past used cable access as a way of reaching out and getting community feedback.
I don't know. This might be a face for radio.
I thought that was funny, Dan. Leslie.
Yes. I thank you, Carlotta. I think that's a great idea. And I was going to suggest, Dan, that maybe you go on the radio and talk about the Olmstead Commission and or do what are they called, PSAs? I think those are every communication station has to provide so many minutes of free PSA time, and it's an option. Or go on Joel Heidkamp, or maybe not Joel Heidkamp, but you know, there are shows that I think you'd be a great speaker. You'd be just talking about what we've done so far. It would be very educational.
And if anybody has any ties to that world or suggestions for persons to approach, that would be a good thing. And I'll make a special note, not news and views.
Yeah, you could walk across the street. There's a TV station right across there, Dan. So
yeah, there you go.
Teresa has a question too.
Well, just a suggestion. I feel like we need to the commission needs to do a press release. You know, Carlotta talked about maybe a lot of people not even knowing what Olmstead is. And so on top of that, what's the Olmstead Commission and what is their role and what are they doing? And I feel like we need to get that information out there. That'd be one thing I would suggest.
Who could help us with that? Teresa, do you have a suggestion? I agree, it's about time for us to unwrap.
Yeah, you mean terms in writing it, Wally?
Yeah. Or some media person that can help us with a statement like that.
Yeah, I do know some media people that I think we could connect with or consult with. So.
And I maybe could find some people that I work with also.
some people with communication in their title or something like that.
Scott?
Yeah, I was going to say, as we're a governor-appointed committee, doesn't all of our press releases have to go through, like, I don't know, the governor's PR people or something like that? I know on other committees, that's the way we've had to do it.
But we would certainly use our communications team. And I think we could get some help.
I think it's a great suggestion, and it'd make your job easier, Dan, as you reach out to other people if we have a president and talk about it. Some of the players that are on the commission. And I'm sure that the Bismarck Tribune would be glad to interview you as well. So. Any other thoughts for Dan's work plan till we meet again? And I think
I have a question, Molly. This is Leslie. Is there any follow-up we need to do either with DPI or DHS on special ed or the autism waivers? I mean, it probably made a lot more sense, especially the autism waiver, it made more sense to you providers, but I don't think it made a lot of sense.
I'd like to ask them where the budget math is coming from, because they indicated that they were being very conservative. It looks like they've, as Wally pointed out, they at certain times have been spending about 30% of the allotted money per biennium. And, you know, if we could see how much money that they are estimating previously that they were going to spend versus how much they have been spending, I'm really not convinced by the arguments that they were giving that they needed to be conservative in expansion, because while that is a laudable goal, it seems like there is a well-established track record that, because of the nature of how those waiver funds are expended, they don't spend up to the limit that they're allotted. And right now, you could theoretically, with the people that have been identified as having that need, expand the waiver by 50%, and given what they've been spending, they still wouldn't hit 75% of the allotted funds.
Scott, do you have see some hands up here? Carlotta?
For me, I think that when you look at the kids on the autism waiver, you look at that level D, oftentimes the two things that we hit could impact the same child. And these kids are not getting the services that they need in school. They're not getting them in their home and community. And, you know, we have a lot of kids going into Life Skills and Transition Center. So I think that oftentimes kids with behavioral disorders they're multi-agency kiddos. And it's not just one agency, and this can really pile up on them. And so I think that we need to really take a look at both of these issues.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the folks you've had come before us too, Dan, and like today was very educational, and I think all of us were making notes that this looks like an Olmstead complaint, very, very potentially. I mean, it just, and the state doesn't look good for these very reasons. If you're not spending the money you're allocating, and you have people on wait lists, what's going on, you know?
We don't want this to look like the parable of the talents.
Well, this is Teresa, and I promise not to go on and on again, because I get pretty passionate about this issue. But if some of these youth were on the autism waiver instead of a wait list, they might get the services they need and then not go into the institution. So these are kids at risk of and in the institution. To me, this is right on point with Olmstead. So that's really why I wanted you guys to take a look at it. And I feel like we need to, I'd like for the commission to do something because it just seems so on point. But if not, I don't know, we'll have to look at other options. So, thank you.
It's certainly a first impression for a number of us. So,
Leslie, in response to your first, inquiry or question, how about I follow, in terms of a follow-up with DHS, circle back around to them and at least ask for a little bit more of an explanation on the budget numbers and how they're coming up with the projections. Is there any other specific information that we'd like followed up on? However
Well, I'm
you articulate
probably
that.
not the best person to answer that question because I know enough now to be dangerous. But I think that Teresa could probably guide you, and Carlotta and Scott. I mean, as you know, professionals who live and breathe in this world, I think they could provide input.
So I'll follow up with these three commission members and ask for additional information from DHS. What about DPI?
I don't know. Thoughts, anybody?
This is Teresa, and I think I'd really like to hear from other people. One of the things that comes up again and again and again to advocates who are trying to help students and families is local control. And so while DPI, I was looking at one of her Jerry's slides, and it said supervision. And there are a lot of things they do. I'm not sure I saw it as really supervision, but more of technical assistance and recommendations and guidelines. And so things that could be systemic in nature for many students with disabilities ends up being, as advocates, us having to represent them student by student by student, by district, by special ed unit, and represent and go through more of a formal process with either a state complaint or due process hearing. I think that's one frustration. I'm not sure, it all relates to IDEA, but also with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is Olmstead.
So we've actually asked you folks for up to 3 hours of your time today, and we're approaching that, but I noticed that we have not, we do have on our agenda public comment. Is there anyone in our audience that listening in today on our commission meeting that has something they'd like to address with the commission? And if you would like to do that, just please identify yourself and let us know.
Hi, this is Lorena Poppy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I am the owner and executive director of Poppy's Promise, and we are a provider of services through the autism waiver. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of information from the provider perspective. We have felt pretty strongly that there are some things that are very limiting with the autism waiver currently, that even when we do have the personnel who could do the work, the allowances aren't there necessarily in the waiver. And a couple examples of that would be getting services out into rural areas. There are kids and families in rural areas who have qualified for the waiver and have waiver slots. However, they're not able to take full advantage of the services that are available. They may receive some service management through our organization, but they're not able to access the respite piece because there is a lack of staffing and in that community, and there is no allowance for travel out from the larger communities, which can be very problematic. But I think sometimes the workforce would be there in many at many times. It's just that there isn't the ability to have that travel reimbursed. And I think another piece of the concern is that the services aren't available or allowed in a manner that is meaningful to families. A lot of times the respite piece of it is very limited to times when families just kind of want to get away for a little bit. Respite is currently not available if families are working or attending school. The providers are not allowed to provide transportation to children to help them get maybe to therapies. So there's a lot of limitations there that I think there could be adjustments made that would free up and open up some access to things that that currently aren't available or that are limiting.
Yeah, thank you, Lorena, for that comment. Appreciate it. Anyone want to reply at all? Okay, if are there others on the call or on the Teams meeting? That I noticed we have a number of other guests too. So if you'd like to make any comments, we sure appreciate them. Okay.
Wally, this is Jake Ruder from the Department of Human Services. Money Follows the Person grant. Just making the commission aware, and maybe Teresa already did this, but the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid are making up to $5 million available to the state to look at capacity building. And so we are looking at ways to continue to address the folks that we've tried to assist out of the nursing facilities, which are folks that are 65 and older, or folks with a physical disability. For example, they might have they might have had a spinal cord injury, they might have had a brain injury, they might have just acquired an injury for other reasons. And then folks that are coming out of intermediate care facilities with an intellectual or developmental disability. And so those are the primary populations that we're going to try to address capacity for. And we're going to address that initially through request for suggestions for the use of that money, and then through a Money Follows the Person stakeholder meeting on October 21st from noon until 2 o'clock. Just wanted to make you guys aware of that because it's in line, of course, with all of the Olmstead Commission work, certainly in line with our work around the potential DOJ investigation that's going on. So just for what it's worth, wanted to make you guys aware of that.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you for attending the meeting here. We appreciate that. And I am sure if you haven't met Dan, I'm sure he'll team up with you here.
Yep, we've met a few times.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Wally, I just wanted to draw some attention in the chat. Vicky P left some comments from the public. I just wanted to draw your attention to those.
Okay.
And they were left at 3:11 or so.